Well, I think for me, I had a father that worked in the industry for a long time, so I got to grow up sort of connected to the industry and be really excited about whatever he brought home or what he was working on. So that was nice as a young man. But from a career standpoint, I started in the engine dynamometers in our Milford Proving Grounds. So I worked on V6s, on valve trains on V6s, and went back to school for a couple of years and then came back and worked in assembly plants for probably 5 years, doing in Buick City and in Orion and Detroit Hamtramck and Wentzville at the time. So I worked and was a release engineer on some of our large front-wheel drive cars. So that's where I started, and I started employed by what was called Flint Automotive Division, which was really Buick, as the company was going through a lot of changes. So that was right in the 1986 time frame when I started, and then went back to school and came back in 1990. So, yeah, big connections for a long period of time. If you look at this region, that we're sitting in right here in Michigan, it's really important because if you look at the history of the auto industry, it changed everything, right? It provided freedom to this country, which is, I'm not sure any industries can really say that, but we did. And the people who did that had a very interesting interaction across all of those different companies, starting, with Flint and Dearborn and the Chrysler piece of it, General Motors piece of it, how that came together, and then, the Henry Ford, of course. And so what's really interesting is the interconnections over a long period of time of all those companies, but really the big impact was on people, right? The providing freedom, but also I think the great migration of jobs and really good paying jobs from a different part of the country to the north was absolutely fundamental, and actually the creation of the middle class. And that is the fabric and core of the country, and it kind of gives me chills because you think about how many people have been provided education, opportunity, and employment over that long a period of time of the auto industry. It's phenomenal. No other industry, no other area. And then if you look at how we fought wars, the arsenal of democracy started right here, when this whole industry converted our plants to weapons to preserve freedom around the world in World War II. There's nothing that's been mobilized as quick or as effective of the turn of the auto industry and bringing that industrial might to win those wars in very faraway places. So I think all of that, but I also think when we look at the transformation that's coming into transportation right now, it's really important to understand how fundamental that change was back when horses and buggies were transportation, and then motorized vehicles became the norm. We're on that sort of a change right now in terms of transportation, on the crowding of cities, the congestion, the danger, and some of the distracted driving piece of that. Those things need to change. So we're ripe for change again, and I think the change is going to start again right here. So it's great to have you guys in this area here, because you're going to witness a change in Detroit and Michigan that is second only to the change that was afforded when we first saw the provision of freedom to everybody in this country. You guys were there when we did the Buick 100th, Chevrolet, General Motors. Those are big milestones, and it's hard to know whether you celebrated those appropriately or not, but at least the ones I got to go to and were fortunate to see, I think we did with your help. And you guys, you really played an important role in those celebrations. And again, how many companies have been around for 100 years and reinvented themselves as many times as those divisions, but also General Motors? I think you can count them maybe on one hand. And most of those were automotive-based type companies. So it's very exciting. It's very exciting to do it here because we just redid a little factory in Flint, and all of a sudden we get people calling that say, "Hey, I wanted the original Dort Durant carriages in my barn, that have sat there for X number of years. Can we, that's when you start seeing the real history from people who really care around those celebrations and milestones of things that start, really can contribute to my children knowing exactly what happened and what's going to happen. So it's very important. Rare do you see that kind of opportunity present itself. So Kevin Corbett said, "Hey, we need a little bit of help up at the original, finance office and the original boardroom, where arguably GM could. I mean, that's where we found it." So he said, "You need to come up and see it, number one, but also I need some help because we don't have enough people in it to finance some of the repairs that are needed. It's a national historic marker." And so, okay, we're going to go up there in the middle of the winter. So I met him right off of 475, and then we drove in, and I saw the office space, which it was actually in pretty good shape. It just needed some things like window repair and roof repair, which we can do that. And so I was happy that he let us know that. And then secondly, I said, "Well, what's across the street?" And he said, "Well, that's the original carriage factory." I said, "You gotta be kidding me." So there was a commercial real estate sign there for sale, and it was doing community service for people who may not have the opportunities and are less fortunate. And so it was serving a good cause. But I said, "Well, I'm going to take a picture of this with my phone." So I did, and then I told our real estate people, "Can you find out if this has ever been on the market or not?" And they did. I said, "Well, how much was it on the market for that it didn't sell for?" And so they told me that, and then I said, "Okay, I want you to go in and bid on this just a little higher as not General Motors." And so they did, and probably more than we need to know, but we got the building, and then I didn't have enough money in my budget to go at it all at once, so we said, "Okay, here's the plan over 4 or 5 years, and we're going to do as much as I can do every year." And so our real estate people really went at it and designed it and fixed. You never know when you buy something like that what it's going to be, but it really we found some things that were it's been around a long time. The river flooded, so there's a lot of things happening over that amount of time, and so to be able to, I asked my boss at the time. I said, I'm going to do this. We need to do this. How many places can you really say the birth of General Motors happened? One, and it's factory one. And so I said, we have to do this. And it's not, it's not a plant. It's nothing like that. But it's something that was an original plant for the beginning of transportation. And so for me, starting in Flint, I started in Hamilton and Flint. And at the original Buick headquarters in Buick City, that's where I started GM. For me personally, and that's where my dad's office was as well. So for me to give back to Flint for the opportunity that I got to work for GM in Flint was very personal for me. But also, we haven't done a lot of that as a company, and it's time to do some of that. And we all agreed. And the original boardroom, the original desk of Billy Durant, I mean, that's pretty big stuff. That's heady stuff, right? So, and the books of carriage sales and all that stuff. It was, for me, it still is very emotional. And I think when we see our retirees go into a space like that, and we see our current employees that have never worked for GM go into a plant like that, people are blown away. They say, "Wow, we can't believe all of this." And then, Kettering, we're so blessed to have Kettering as our partners there. And so we've got an archive, I think, that's like no other. And I'm on the board of Henry Ford Innovation, and that's sort of an amazing one. Worldwide, this isn't, but it's pretty darn cool because it's stuff that you can't find at the Henry Ford, and it's in addition to. And it'll never compete with that. It's just not that scale, but it's a small jewel of a piece of history in Flint that people can really see how the whole thing started. And yeah, it's pretty neat. Well, I think we've, at Factory One, for instance, I think, why we need the past detailed like we have it leads to the future. You have to understand what really went on. And so at a place like Factory One, we actually have a space where kids can come and look at the archive and actually discover that and learn about it and study. It's really important because I think it inspires a generation below me to see what the auto industry really does. And I think that history should, if told right, inspire that generation to make things. Don't forget, service economies aren't around, don't last forever. And that service economy is really based on an economy of import and export of things made in country. And so, 20,000 suppliers that work for, to make our cars great, that we bring together to make a car out of it. That's huge magnitude. What we don't do enough in our schools, in my opinion, is tell that story. That story is very, very important. You're just seeing some of the STEM programs and STEAM programs really mature, and so we pour a lot of time and energy into that as a company and as a community, but those things are really important because coupled with history, that's really the future. Those kids and those generations are creating our future. And so that's absolutely vital to the lifeblood of this country, but also I think the success of the nation economically.